Sebastian's storyline in Hogwarts Legacy is centered around Anne, but she's barely present in it. Everything that has to do with his questline exists because he wants to cure her. Currently, players are asked to care about Anne because Sebastian cares about her. In our rewrite, Anne is one of the members of the Golden Quartet, and perhaps the protagonist's closest friend during their first few years at the school. We will come to understand her, the life and friendships that she loses, and simply everything she is outside of the curse. Anne's personality isn't non-existent in Hogwarts Legacy, but it's thin at best. She's not completely averse to Sebastian's search for her cure, as shown by her first scene, but rejects his later pursuits of darker topics. We meet Anne after almost every defining event in her life has already occurred. Her parents have died, she was cursed, she has left Hogwarts, every treatment has failed, and her remaining family has split over her. When we meet her, we have no prior reference to compare her to. This means the protagonist has no real connection to her. The protagonist engages in increasingly dangerous choices in her name, but there's no meaningful relationship between the two, since everything is through Sebastian. Even Anne's opposition to Sebastian's decisions is underdeveloped. We don't get to see the early hope that something might cure her, the exhaustion of repeated failures, and the eventual conversations that this might be something that just has to be accepted. Everything about Anne is in relation to her curse. We don't know what she enjoyed at Hogwarts, what she was talented at, what she wanted for her future, or simply who she was. To resolve these issues, the protagonist will know Anne before the tragedy of the curse. They will know her as a friend long before she is the girl that Sebastian is trying to save. Anne Salo arrives at Hogwarts like all other 11-year-olds. She comes with her twin brother, with the hopes of discovering what kind of witch she will be and finding a family at Hogwarts after the death of her parents. Anne develops a particular talent for charms, especially how even the simplest spell can be effective when used properly. Sebastian may have the ambitious plans, but Anne knows the clever solution to get it done. The twins embody the different sides of Slytherin. Sebastian is ambitious and a natural leader, while Anne is more cunning and perceptive. She, more than most, knows what people want and how to persuade them. This makes them an effective team. Neither are particularly the responsible one. They're both mischievous, but Anne is better at talking their way out of trouble should they need it. Her natural talents, while used for trouble, also make her a particularly good friend to those she's close with. She remembers the small details, and her love of charms shows up in her gifts for people, such as a magical gift for the protagonist, based on a private memory the two of them share. However, this natural ability isn't an uncomplicated one. Because she understands people so well, she begins to assume what's best for them to be told. It's kind, from a certain point of view, telling them what she thinks is best for them, and she's often not wrong, but eventually it will lead to conflict. Anne cares deeply about the people around her, but this leads her to try and manage their feelings instead of trusting them with the truth. The player will come to know a mischievous and occasionally controlling young witch who has the world ahead of her. The eventual curse will interrupt her life and prevent the protagonist from seeing her future take shape. Shortly before the sorting ceremony, while the new students wait to enter the Great Hall, the protagonist and Anne meet one another. After being separated from their other companions for a short while, Anne notices the protagonist is nervous and begins speaking with them. She subtly distracts them from the situation. Even at 11, she has the beginning traits of someone who understands people and knows, in very simple ways, how to use it. Their meeting is not long, but enough so that after the sorting ceremony, Anne makes a point of finding them again. While prefects are ushering new students to their common rooms, she speaks to the protagonist once more, regardless if they're in a different house. When Sebastian comes looking for her, she introduces the two of them. If the protagonist is in Slytherin, they will naturally spend more time with them, but regardless, this will not be the last time they speak to one another. The Golden Quartet forms gradually and naturally. Ominis is already friends with the twins, and the four begin to spend more time with one another. There's no one scene where they declare they are friends for life, but they always are around each other. They study after lessons, arrange trips to Hogsmeade in their third year, go to Quidditch matches, explore parts of the castle they perhaps shouldn't, and get into more trouble. Anne and the protagonist develop a deeper bond. She's perhaps the first person to recognize how they were feeling, and throughout the years remains unusually attentive to all parts of them. They might experiment with charms, study in the library, wander the castle, or just otherwise spend time with one another. Depending on how the player interprets this relationship, there may also be faint suggestions of something more, even if neither of them is old enough to define those feelings. I think ambiguity is more valuable than any hard stance. Either way, Anne should be one of the most important people to the protagonist, regardless of what the future may hold. Over the summer break between the second and third year, Anne is cursed. However, when Anne returns to Hogwarts for her third year, everything should appear to be normal. Over time, it is only through small disruptions that players should begin to feel something wrong. The first clear hint occurs during the Golden Quartet's first Hogsmeade visit, when Anne falls behind while the quartet are hanging out. When we check on her, she dismisses it as her being tired, making up some story about the girls in her dorm staying up late. Even if the player may suspect something, the 13-year-old student thinks nothing more of it. Similar moments continue through the school year, and over time, they seem to happen more and more. All of these issues together begin to disrupt the ordinary life that had been established over the first 2 years at Hogwarts. Anne conceals the truth because she knows how people around her will react, and because she's hopeful that there will be a cure soon. Additionally, she begins investigating cures for herself privately. Because Anne understands people so well, she believes that she can manage what they know best. Anne doles out different information to different people depending on what she thinks they can handle. Of course, this secrecy begins damaging the bond of trust within the quartet. Sebastian has always been closest with her, especially after the death of their parents, but now she's spending more time alone. Anne, hoping to prevent panic and worry, has begun isolating herself from everyone. Finally, the curse becomes impossible to conceal. Anne suffers a severe attack while the quartet is hanging out, trying to return things to how they once were. The quartet remains at her side, with Sebastian in particular taking it badly, given his familial situation. Anne explains the situation to her friends, and Sebastian in particular is furious that she and Solomon would hide this from him. The curse continues to take things from Anne. Concentrating on magic becomes difficult, and at times she misses classes, and eventually entire days at school. Towards the end of the school year, she can no longer remain at Hogwarts. Every attempt to preserve her old life has become impossible to sustain, and while she insists that she can continue, the adults in her life say that remaining at the school is no longer safe. Anne's departure is nearing the end of the prologue. She promises that she's not disappearing, that the Golden Quartet will remain intact, but the player knows that's not true. Anne is admitted, full-time, to St. Mungo's for a longer, continuous period of observation and treatment. There's a brief renewal of hope, given the superiority of the healers now available. The group visits her at St. Mungo's, one of the story-only locations in the game. Anne tries to accommodate everyone to make it feel normal, and for a short while it works, before they are interrupted by a healer, and the friends must leave while Anne undergoes further treatment. Eventually, the list of treatments are exhausted, and Anne is discharged to Feldcroft. Solomon reorganizes his life around caring for Anne, temporarily leaving his post as the Hogwarts gamekeeper. He's not particularly expressive when the protagonist visits, but it should be clear to players, through his actions, that he cares. This is the split between Sebastian and Solomon. Sebastian does not see this side, and believes that Solomon has accepted there is no cure, and that Anne is being encouraged to accept it as well. To mediate this, Anne continues to repeat the flaw that began isolating her at Hogwarts. She attempts to control both of them by giving them different versions of the truth. However, this prevents both from fully understanding her, as they believe the other is wrongfully influencing her. Anne's character quest becomes available early during the 5th year, with her sending a letter to the protagonist requesting their visit when they have time. Rank 1 begins with Anne asking the protagonist to retrieve a box of belongings that she left at Hogwarts. It's nothing crucial, that's why it's still there more than a year after she left the school, but it's personal enough that she doesn't want just anyone to see it. The box is nothing special, on the surface, just some old personal items that she had stashed away. They're found in a new secret passage that served as Anne's workshop while at Hogwarts. Inside, we find half-finished projects, books, scrolls, and more, with a few scattered notes around her curse to confirm she was looking into it while at Hogwarts. After returning the box, Anne sorts through it for what remains useful to her or what she can modify to accommodate her new life. Returning the box completes the first rank of her character quest and unlocks the secret passage for new traversal options around the castle and a hiding spot if necessary. Rank 2 features Anne completing one of her old ideas, an enchanted bookmark that responds to her voice. The protagonist must retrieve the materials necessary and consult the library about a particular charm before returning to Anne to complete the enchantment. It's a simple process, and the pair work together to create something that helps Anne in her daily life. Rank 3 begins with the protagonist accompanying Solomon on part of his duties as gamekeeper before traveling to Feldcroft. He returned to Hogwarts on a reduced schedule after a year away. The goal is to see, in a way that Sebastian can't, how divided and stretched Solomon's life has become. Once at Feldcroft, Anne once again requests the protagonist to help her make something. This time, it's an enchanted lantern for Solomon, one that can float beside him, stay lit despite the conditions, dim around frightened or nocturnal creatures, etc. Once completed, although Solomon gives no emotional thanks, the player can see him use it around Hogwarts, especially if they sneak out at night and see him. Rank 4 begins with a seemingly ordinary visit. Everything seems normal, but it eventually becomes clear that she is trying to hide one of her attacks, as it becomes worse and worse. This is the worst attack that the player has seen, and they can do nothing but listen to her. The only thing to help her is to retrieve a potion that briefly dulls the pain, and be by her side until it subsides. Once it's over, Anne requests the player not tell Sebastian or Solomon about the attack. She doesn't want Solomon to abandon his position at Hogwarts, and doesn't want Sebastian to become more desperate in his attempts to find a cure. Rank 5 is the emotional culmination of the quest. She speaks openly about the cure, Sebastian, Solomon, and what she wants from her life, unsure if it will be cut short by this curse. Part of her imagines returning to Hogwarts, reclaiming the future that she once imagined, but after every treatment has failed, she doesn't know if it will come true. She is slowly beginning to feel like the hope from a new treatment is more likely to end up in disappointment. She confides in the protagonist and how she contributes to the division between Sebastian and Solomon. She contributes to Sebastian's belief that there is still hope for a cure, and Solomon that she will not take any further risk. Anne is full of contradictions at this point. She could want a cure and yet still refuse potential treatments. She can prepare for her future without a cure, without giving up hope. She can love Sebastian while resenting him for what he does in her name. At the end of the conversation, Anne reveals that she is trying to create at least one more enchantment on her own, a gift for the protagonist. Rank 6 begins with the protagonist visiting Feldcroft, where Anne is coming closer to completing the enchantment. A pair of tokens, that when used, sends a signal to the other. The protagonist suggests a small alteration. Whenever there is a severe attack, the token automatically alerts the protagonist. However, Anne disagrees. This automatic alert may make her safer. In fact, it almost certainly would. If an attack was severe enough to leave her unable to manually send the signal, the token would be wasted when it would be most necessary. However, Anne spent much of her time at St. Mungo's, monitored constantly by healers who watched every change in her condition. Anne does not want to feel like she is under constant observation, reminding her of when her normal life was torn away from her. Regardless of the conversation, Anne goes ahead with the manual activation. But the protagonist has the chance to secretly add the automatic variation to Anne's. The protagonist takes theirs, Anne takes hers, and so brings Anne's character quest to its end. Throughout the school year, Sebastian has continued researching methods to break Anne's curse. Eventually, nearing the end of the game, he discovers a ritual that promises to transfer between two people, and he aims to use it. When Sebastian explains it to Anne, she immediately refuses. First, because she won't subject someone else to her pain, and second, because she has no idea if it would even work in the first place. This is the last chance for Sebastian to turn back, but how could he? He remembers in Anne the search for a cure for herself that shows hope even to this day. Sebastian says he cannot understand her, but accepts her decision. He only asks that she help him examine it one last time to see if it matches with anything in her research, and she agrees. This is where completing Anne's character quest comes into play. If players have not completed the quest, Ominous will arrive, saying that Sebastian is gone with the relic, and the pair will head to the catacombs. If they have completed her quest, then she can signal to the protagonist, or it can be signaled automatically, and when Ominous arrives, they will have a greater understanding of what is happening. In the catacombs, Sebastian begins the ritual while Anne still refuses. He begs, reminding her of what she has lost, and asking if she expects him to sit and watch her die. Then, Anne suffers another attack, and Sebastian believes this may be his final opportunity to save her. He casts the Imperious Curse on her, commands her to complete the ritual, and it begins. As Ominous and the protagonist arrive, the transfer begins to become unstable. The curse has become entangled in her being, and it begins to overwhelm Sebastian. The protagonist, through their understanding of ancient magic, sees the curse for what it is. They can see the foreign magic in her body, and how it has ensnared her life in its grasp. The pair work to break the connection and end the ritual. It ultimately fails, and Sebastian rages that the transfer was working, but they stopped it. Sebastian's willingness to use an unforgivable curse on Anne proves how far his pursuit has taken him. Whether he can confront what he has done depends on how the protagonist has interacted with him during the school year. Regardless, Anne tells Sebastian to stay away from her, since she can no longer trust that he will respect her refusals. Anne's story has 4 possible endings depending on what the player has done during the school year. There are 2 factors here that determine the options available to the player. Knowledge accrued during the school year determines what the player has the ability to do, and their conduct with Anne determines whether she trusts them. The first ending is one in which Anne remains cursed. This is always a possibility, although everything surrounding it changes depending on what the protagonist has done. The protagonist may decide that they do not understand ancient magic well enough to use it on Anne. Alternatively, Anne may not trust the protagonist well enough to do anything, believing they may be more like Sebastian in all the wrong ways. The second ending is one in which the player removes Anne's pain. However, the rest of her emotions are stripped away over time. This ending is the repetition of Isidora's mistake. The spell works. Anne suffers no more pain from the attacks, the constant pain disappears, and she can live a life without anticipating when the curse's effects will return. Over time, Anne begins to look at the people around her. She knows who the protagonist is, who Ominous, Sebastian, and Solomon are. She knows these things for a fact, but the feelings attached to all of them are gone. The horror of it should hit hard. If the protagonist has done her character quest, she recognizes the lantern she made for Solomon, but doesn't care if he uses it. She recognizes the pair token that she and the protagonist have, but feels no desire to contact them. She is quiet, detached, and cannot understand why everyone around her is grieving when she is no longer in pain. The third ending is the one in which Anne's curse is genuinely broken without removing her emotions or identity. This ending requires the highest understanding of ancient magic that the player can attain. The protagonist needs to learn from Isidora and have a trust of Anne. The protagonist uses their ancient magic to unravel and break the curse. Throughout the procedure, we feel Anne's emotions, her anger, her feelings of loss and relief. The emotions remain, while the curse is gone. While the curse is gone, Anne remains physically weak, but recovery may be possible. Nothing will be the same as it once was, but there is a chance to rebuild it into something new and better than many could have hoped for. This ending has massive implications for the protagonist, and while it does good for Anne, perhaps it is the most dangerous for the protagonist. Now, the fourth ending is the most controversial, and perhaps too bleak for the game itself. But I think it completes several important ideas within this rewrite. The fourth ending has Anne request and receive an agreed upon death. More specifically, she asks the protagonist to use Avada Kedavra. This is not available automatically. The player must have completed Anne's character quest, and she must fully trust the protagonist. Following the failed ritual, the curse has become entangled with Anne's being. Her attacks have become significantly worse, and an emergency visit to St. Mungo's has confirmed that her deterioration has dramatically increased. Anne must bring this up, and it must be in a moment of calm, not one where the curse has struck her recently. Anne does not want the remainder of her life to be consumed by increasingly dangerous attempts made because the people around her cannot bear to stop searching. The curse has already taken years of her life and damaged nearly every relationship around her. Anne does not want it to determine her final moments as well. She requests the protagonist use Avada Kedavra on her. It is instant and painless, much unlike the chronic pain from her curse. This is not brought up in one conversation. We'll see that Anne has thought of this for a while, and the protagonist can always refuse, bringing us back around to one of the other endings. This is where the paired token receives its final payoff. An object created around Anne's right to choose when she asks for help becomes the means through which she communicates the most difficult choice in the story. She activates it herself and calls the protagonist to her. Multiple times she confirms that she is sure, and the player needs to be able to stop at any time if they wish to. However, if the player does not withdraw, they raise their wand and cast the killing curse. Anne dies immediately and without pain. The most important part of our rewrite is making Anne a person that players can care about because of who she is to them, not simply because of what she means to Sebastian. By knowing Anne before the curse, and spending time with her afterwards, the player can understand what she has lost and what has remained. Anne's ending should feel like the culmination of her own story, not just the resolution of Sebastian's motivation or a final test of the protagonist's abilities. In Hogwarts Legacy, Anne exists primarily as the tragedy that motivates Sebastian. In this rewrite, she is the girl the protagonist grew up with, and years later, desperately tries to save. But her life never becomes theirs to decide. The story does not need to guarantee that Anne is cured. It needs to let Anne participate in deciding what her being saved means, if she is saved at all.